Hi everybody, it's crazy, it's Monday, and it's time for the UPBGE video of the week. Now before I get started, gotta give a shout out to my trusted, because you guys rock. To my crazy fam, I love you guys. And to my Patreons, thank you for your continued support. Now we're up to episode number 51, and we left off last week with Armature and Poses. Now, I'm gonna switch over here to my Blender window, and for those of you who aren't familiar with any kind of aren't really familiar with animations, this is the animation one, except for I changed this one over to my armature because I'm going to show something a little bit different. So, but if you come over here, you can click on animation. It will show you all the animations, and this will be your timeline. Okay, so but right now I've got it as the logic editor. All right, so I'm going to start reading, and then we'll go on to other stuff. Okay, all right, so Armature and Poses. The bone animation system works in the game engine very closely to the way it does in Blender. You will create a mesh object and an armature object to deform the first. Okay, mesh and armature. Both the armature and the mesh objects need to be present in the game for them to work. In fact, if you are adding the animated object dynamically, for example, through the addObject actuator, you will refer to the armature object to bring in the animated conjunction. As in Blender, the armature object is the parent of the mesh. Okay, so the armature object, this little guy right here, okay, if I grab him, it moves it. Okay, as you see over here, that I've got my armature right there, and this is my object. That moves it as long as it's parented to it. Okay. Therefore, the armature object. Okay. Yeah. Therefore, I'm sorry. Therefore, the armature object will be the game object running most of the animation sensors and actuators. That's these guys right here. Okay. Thus, you may as well dump all the logic bricks of your object in the armature. Okay, an exception is the replace mesh option in the edit object actuator. In that case, you need to run the actuator in the mesh object itself. So the only one you don't want to put in the armature if you're doing stuff with the mesh is the replace object. Okay, so that would be the edit object. Yeah, the edit object and scoot you up right here, and then replace mesh. Okay, so when you've got this one set up, this needs to actually be in here, not in your armature. Okay, so do not put that there. All right. Sorry, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, as you can hear, but I shall trudge on. If you will trudge on, we will all trudge on. All right, so the workflow for Armature and Bones resembles the NLA, non-linear animation editor in Blender. You create individual animation actions that you want to be played at a certain time. Those are the actions we referred to when talking about the animation cycles earlier in this chapter. The first difference is that you don't need to predefine the order and length of all the action you want to play. For example, in the NLA editor, if you want to animate a shark turning, you will create an action for straight swimming and another for turning. You will alternate between them based on your script. Maybe the shark turns at the same time you throw bait close by. Speaking of NLA, even though NLA animation is not supported in the game engine, you can still use the NLA editor to make your animation sequences. Cutscenes or complex dialogue scenes can benefit a lot from a NLA-based workflow. For example, you can combine dialogue actions from a mocap, motion capture system, with pre-generated idle body animation cycles. Once the animation editing is done, you need to combine the actions into a single action with a bake action operator available via the search menu spacebar, which is click over here. That's this guy right here. Okay, all you gotta do is hit your spacebar. This little guy. You hit your spacebar, you can hit search, and then you can type in, what did it say? Bake action. Okay, let's try that. Bake. Yeah, right there, bake action. NLA bake action. Okay, that's all you have to do. Alright, so unlike in the NLA editor, you have a chance to play actions based on the player decisions or AI pre-designed interactions. In our shark example, we can have the player controlling the shark and turning it. When it gets turned or tired of swimming in a straight line, maybe the shark likes to chase its tail restlessly. Okay. Either way, we can play and stop playing the individual animations, straight swimming and turning anytime. The second difference is regarding the bone constraints. We will cover it in more detail later. It's important to know that not all the bone constraints that work in Blender will work in the game engine. Most of them do, so it shouldn't be much of a hassle. Also, the constrained bone and the target bone should be part of the same armature. The third difference is the general simplicity of the armature and bone system. In general games have similar rigging as the armature and bone system are known than in animated movies. For AAA games, this is not so true. Their rigs are closer to film than to traditional game rigs. In the end, the complexity of the rig is also directly related to the amount of polygons your mesh has. Therefore, as the game objects naturally have fewer faces than their animated film counterparts, the rigging reflects that. A good example is Frankie the Flying Squirrel in the animated short Big Buck Bunny and in the Yo Frankie game. As you can see, and I'm going to switch over here. There we go. Okay, as you can see over here, okay, as you can see, the original model had 11,777 faces and 388 bones, while the model remade for the game only has 2,509 faces and 52 bones. Even though the role of Frankie was pumped up from a side film character to the game main character, the complexity of the game file is much simpler. The film file face count goes to 128,404 when you apply the subdivision surface modifiers. So you see all these. That's because in animation movies, they're animating actual body movements, and they're making the character walk or doing certain things that normally in a game you won't really have to do because you've got an animation that just makes them move. All you need is like a breathing animation. So you basically just need their shoulders to move, their chest to move, and their head to bob. Instead of their eyes moving and everything else, and their mouth and all this. You can add some stuff like that, but it's a little bit different. Okay, let's back over here. Okay, when to use pose actions. How far am I at now? Okay, I'm getting close to my 15-minute mark. So, when to use pose actions. Always. The main usage of pose actions is the one explained earlier when talking about animation cycles. Full animation cycles will not be the only ones in your character repository. You don't need to have all the bones posed in all the actions you want to play. Imagine you want to have a regular walking animation and allow the character to look back while walking. For this kind of situation, you can animate the upper body bones in a different action than the legs and the hip. If the animations are in separate actions, you can turn the single actions, walk, look back, on and off individually. This will spare you from making an animation action for every possible combination of individual movements: blink, jump, walk, scratch the head, and so on. It also makes it simpler to control those actions. They don't need to have the same length or be called from the same actuator. Animated characters are not the only game objects that can use the Armature animation system. No. You can use armatures anytime you need more control than the motion actuator can provide. Even a simple object like a door can use an armature to help open and close it. The problem with a door is that you often need to use the door as a colliding object to keep the three little pigs safe from the wolf. That leads us to our next topic. Okay, and that's where we're going to go ahead and end off with today. Graphic mesh versus physics shape. And that's what I'm going to end off today. We ended at 11 minutes. So let me kick over to here so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're going to finish off here with graphic mesh and versus physics shape. Okay, we'll do that next week, and we'll add a little bit more to our repertoire. Hopefully, I'll get this little bit of a scratch out of my voice. Unfortunately, they don't make anything to kind of smooth that out. So I do apologize for not being, clear voice today. But give it a try, have fun with it, and see y'all next week.